The galaxy was old, far older than humans could truly understand. Civilizations had risen and fallen across its spiral arms for billions of years. Empires had stretched across thousands of star systems only to crumble into dust and be forgotten. And through all of it, 12 species had endured. They called themselves the Elder Races. And they ruled the Galactic Consortium with absolute authority. Humanity was not one of them. Humanity was nothing. Commander Daniel Price stood on the bridge of his ship, the horizon's edge, and stared at the view screen. The purple nebula before them swirled with ancient gases, beautiful and deadly. His crew had been exploring the outer spiral for 3 years now, mapping regions that no human had ever visited. The consortium had granted them permission to explore this worthless corner of space, probably hoping they would get lost and never return. Daniel was 53 years old, with gray streaking his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. He had spent his entire adult life in space, working his way up from a simple cargo hauler to command of an exploration vessel. He had seen wonders that most humans would never believe. He had also seen the way the elder races looked at his species, like they were insects that had somehow learned to build starships. "Lieutenant." Maria Santos approached him with a data tablet in her hands. She was his second in command, a woman of 35 with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Daniel trusted her more than anyone else on the ship. She showed him the readings without speaking. At first, Daniel thought the sensors had malfunctioned. The energy signature coming from a nearby moon made no sense. It did not match anything in their databases. It did not match anything in the consortium's shared scientific records. It was something entirely new. Or perhaps Daniel thought something very, very old. He ordered the ship to investigate. His crew followed his commands without question, though. He could see the curiosity burning in their eyes. They were explorers at heart, every one of them. They had signed up for this mission because they wanted to find something that mattered. The moon was small and airless, covered in gray dust that had not been disturbed for millions of years. Their sensors detected a hollow space beneath the surface, a vast chamber that should not have existed. Daniel assembled a landing team, himself. Maria, Chief Engineer Kevin Shaw, and Dr. Lisa Morgan. They're expert on alien archaeology. They descended in a shuttle and landed near what appeared to be an entrance carved into the rock. The architecture was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The doorway was too large for humans, built for beings that must have stood at least 4 meters tall. Strange symbols covered the frame. Worn but still visible after countless ages, Lisa ran her scanner over the symbols, her hands trembling with excitement. She said that the language did not match any known species. This was not Zirathi or Velthin or any of the elder races. This was something that came before all of them. The door opened when they approached. Ancient mechanisms grinding to life after an eternity of silence. Beyond lay a corridor that stretched into darkness, lit only by the beams of their flashlights. The air inside was stale but breathable, preserved by systems that still functioned after millions of years. They walked for what felt like hours, passing chambers filled with equipment they could not identify. Daniel felt like a child wandering through a giant's home. Everything was too large, too advanced, too alien, and yet somehow it also felt welcoming. The precursors, as Lisa had started calling them, built this place to be found. The central chamber took Daniel's breath away. It was vast, easily the size of a sports stadium, and every surface was covered with data storage devices. Holographic displays flickered to life as they entered, showing star maps and technical diagrams and images of beings that had vanished from the universe long before the elder races were born. Kevin approached one of the displays and began studying the diagrams it showed. His engineering training allowed him to recognize some of what he was seeing. Propulsion systems, power generators, weapons, shield technology, all of it centuries beyond anything the consortium possessed. Maria looked at Daniel with wide eyes. She understood what this meant. With this technology, humanity could change everything. They could build ships that would make the elder races look primitive. They could defend themselves against any threat. They could finally stand as equals in a galaxy that had treated them like dirt. But Daniel also understood the danger. If the consortium learned about this discovery, they would take it all. The elder races had maintained their power for millennia by ensuring that no younger species ever rose to challenge them. They would destroy humanity before allowing them to possess such knowledge. He gathered his team and spoke to them quietly. What they had found here would remain secret. They would copy everything they could and bring it back to Earth. They would share it only with those who could be trusted absolutely. And then slowly and carefully, humanity would begin to change. Lisa asked if he truly thought they could keep something this big hidden. The consortium had spies everywhere. They monitored human communications and tracked human ships. Sooner or later, someone would find out. Daniel nodded slowly. He knew the risks, but he also knew that this was humanity's one chance. For 800 years, they had lived under the thumb of species who viewed them as barely sentient animals. They had accepted unfair treaties and unjust restrictions because they had no choice. They had smiled and bowed and pretended to be grateful for scraps. That time was ending. They spent 2 weeks in the vault, copying every piece of data they could find. The precursor archives were vast, containing knowledge that would take generations to fully understand. Kevin focused on the engineering designs. Lisa documented the historical records. Maria coordinated the logistics of transferring everything to their ship's computers. When they finally left the moon, Daniel ordered the entrance sealed. He did not want anyone else to find this place until humanity was ready. The horizon's edge turned toward Earth, carrying a cargo more valuable than all the gold and precious metals in the galaxy. During the long journey home, Daniel often stood alone on the bridge, staring at the stars. He thought about his parents, who had lived and died on a colony world where humans were not even allowed to own property. He thought about his sister, who had been denied medical treatment because the local consortium hospital did not serve lesser species. He thought about all the indignities and injustices that his people had suffered. No more, he promised himself. No more. The crew of the Horizon's Edge arrived at Earth 6 months later. Daniel requested a private meeting with the highest levels of government, claiming to have discovered something of extreme importance. When he showed them what he had found, the room fell silent. Men and women who had spent their careers accepting human limitations suddenly saw a future they had never dared to imagine that night. In a secure bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, a new project was born. It had no official name and no official budget. Its existence would be denied at every level. But its purpose was clear: to use the precursor. Technology to build a humanity that would never again kneel before anyone. Daniel Price watched the first scientists arrive and begin their work. He was too old to see the fruits of this labor, he knew, but his grandchildren might, or their grandchildren. However long it took, humanity would rise. The galaxy would learn to respect them. One way or another, 50 years had passed since Daniel Price turned from the outer spiral with secrets that would reshape human destiny. He had died peacefully at the age of 87, never seeing the full fruits of his discovery. But the work continued, hidden from the eyes of a galaxy that still viewed humanity as insignificant. Director Amanda Cole walked through the corridors of Facility 7, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was the third director to oversee this operation, inheriting the role from her predecessor 5 years ago. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders every single day. The facility stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, carved from solid rock and shielded by technology that made it invisible to any sensor the consortium possessed. Thousands of scientists and engineers worked here, dedicated to a single purpose. They were unlocking the secrets of the precursors and transforming humanity in the process. Amanda stopped at a window overlooking the main laboratory. Below, a team of researchers was testing a new type of power generator. It was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, yet it produced more energy than the fusion reactors that powered entire cities. The precursors had mastered technologies that made the elder races look like children playing with toys. Dr. Henry Walsh approached her, tablet in hand. He was the head of propulsion research, a brilliant man who had devoted his life to this project. His hair had gone white from the stress, but his eyes still burned with enthusiasm. He reported that the latest engine tests had exceeded all expectations. A ship equipped with their new drive system could cross the entire galaxy in less than a month. The consortium's fastest vessels took years to cover the same distance. When the time came, humanity would be able to strike anywhere at any time, before their enemies could even react. Amanda nodded slowly. The progress was remarkable, but it also terrified her. They were building weapons of unimaginable power. They were creating a military force that could challenge the elder races themselves. And they were doing it all in secret, lying to the entire galaxy about who they really were. She asked Henry if he ever had doubts. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said that his grandmother had been killed by Zerathi raiders when he was a boy. The consortium had done nothing, claiming that humans were responsible for their own protection. He had grown up knowing that his species was alone in a hostile universe. These weapons were not for conquest, Henry said. They were for survival. They were for the day when someone decided that humanity had lived long enough. And on that day, they would be ready. Amanda understood. Everyone who worked in this facility had similar stories. The consortium had given humanity plenty of reasons to prepare for war. Meanwhile, on the surface, life continued as normal. Human colonies expanded slowly, never exceeding the growth rates approved by the consortium. Human ships traveled between stars using conventional drives, taking weeks or months for journeys that could now be completed in hours. Human diplomats attended consortium meetings and accepted whatever terms were offered without complaint. It was all a performance, carefully maintained illusion. The real humanity was growing in the shadows, building strength that no one suspected. Admiral Christopher Grant commanded the hidden fleet from a space station disguised as an asteroid mining operation. He was a large man with a calm demeanor that concealed a sharp tactical mind. His staff had spent years studying consortium military doctrine, identifying weaknesses that the elder races did not even know they had. His chief strategist was Natalie Brooks, a woman who could analyze a battle situation faster than most computers. She had developed dozens of scenarios for potential conflicts, planning for every possible enemy response. The simulations they ran were terrifying in their efficiency. Human forces won almost every engagement. Often with zero casualties, Christopher sometimes wondered if they were being too confident. The consortium had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had crushed countless rebellions and absorbed dozens of species. Surely, they could not be as vulnerable as the simulations suggested. But then he remembered the precursor archives. The elder races believed they were the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They had no idea that a far greater species had existed before them, a species whose technology made theirs look primitive. The consortium had grown complacent, certain that no one could ever challenge their supremacy. That complacency would be their downfall. The hidden shipyards produced new vessels at a steady pace. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, combining precursor technology with human ingenuity. Their hulls were made from materials that could withstand direct hits from consortium weapons. Their shields could absorb energy that would vaporize conventional vessels. Their weapons could punch through any armor the elder races possessed. The crews who manned these ships trained constantly, preparing for a day they hoped would never come, but knew was inevitable. They learned tactics that no consortium commander had ever seen. They practiced maneuvers that defied conventional physics. They became the finest fighting force the galaxy had ever known. Back on Earth, President Margaret Hayes managed the delicate balance of maintaining the illusion while supporting the hidden preparations. She met with consortium representatives and smiled politely at their condescension. She signed treaties that restricted human expansion and accepted inspections that verified human compliance. She played the part of a leader of a weak and insignificant species. But in private meetings with her inner circle, Margaret discussed the real state of affairs. The preparations were nearly complete. Within a decade, humanity would be ready to reveal themselves. The question was whether they would choose the moment, or whether circumstances would force their hand. She prayed that it would be the former. A controlled revelation would allow for diplomacy, for negotiation, for the possibility of a peaceful transition. But she also knew that the galaxy was unpredictable. Wars started over misunderstandings. Empires fell because of a single mistake. Humanity needed to be prepared for anything. The people of Earth and the colonies knew nothing of these secrets. They lived their lives, raised their families, and accepted their place in the galactic order. Some resented the restrictions imposed by the consortium. Others had grown so accustomed to their inferior status that they could not imagine anything different. Amanda. Cole often thought about these ordinary people. Everything she did was for them. The scientists who worked through the night, the engineers who solved impossible problems, the soldiers who trained for battles they might never fight. All of them were working to give humanity a future worth living. She stood at the window of her office, looking at the stars visible through the artificial sky projected on the facility's ceiling. Somewhere out there, the elder races slept soundly, confident in their eternal dominance. They had no idea that the species they dismissed as primitive was building an empire right under their noses. The revolution would come silently, Amanda knew. Not with declarations or demands, but with quiet preparation and infinite patience. When humanity finally revealed their true strength, the galaxy would never be the same. She returned to her work, reviewing reports and approving projects and guiding the endless flow of progress. Every day brought them closer to the moment of truth. Every breakthrough added another weapon to their arsenal. Every success proved that humanity was capable of far more than anyone had ever believed. Daniel. Price had started this journey 50 years ago with a single discovery. Now thousands of people continued his legacy, bound together by a shared vision of a future where humanity would never again bow before anyone. The mighty empire they were constructing existed only in secret for now, but soon the entire galaxy would see what humans could accomplish. When they refused to accept their limitations, the stars awaited, and humanity was almost ready to claim them. The colony of New Providence was a beautiful world. Green forests covered its continents, and clear blue oceans sparkled under a yellow sun. 800,000 humans called it home, living in cities built along the coastlines and farming communities spread across fertile valleys. It was one of humanity's most successful settlements, a place where families had grown for generations. None of them saw the attack coming. Hi, Overseer. Victho of the Zerothi Dominion had decided that humanity needed a lesson. His species had ruled their sector of the galaxy for 6,000 years, and they had grown tired of these upstart primates asking questions and pushing boundaries. A demonstration of power would remind everyone of their proper place. 12 Zerothi. Warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel above New Providence without warning. They were massive vessels, each one bristling with weapons that could level cities. The planetary defense grid built to consortium-approved specifications activated immediately. It lasted less than 3 hours. Commander Rachel Torres was on patrol near the outer colonies when the distress signal reached her ship. She was 34 years old, a career officer who had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments like this. Her vessel, the Adamant, was one of the new ships built in secret, equipped with technology that the consortium had never seen. She read the initial reports with growing horror. The Zerothi were not just attacking military targets. They were bombarding civilian centers, schools, hospitals, residential areas. This was not a military operation. This was extermination. Rachel immediately contacted Admiral Grant at Fleet Command. His face appeared on her screen, grim and determined. He had already received the reports and was mobilizing the response. But he needed time to coordinate the full fleet. Time that the people of New Providence did not have. He gave Rachel permission to proceed with her task force. 4 ships against 12 Zerothi warships. By conventional calculations, it was suicide. But Rachel's ships were not conventional. She gathered her captains for a brief conference. Samuel Drake of the Resolute, Catherine Mills of the Defiant, and young Lieutenant Commander Paul Brennan of the Swift. They were all veterans of the hidden training programs, all believers in the cause they served. None of them hesitated when Rachel explained what they were about to do. The Adamant and her escorts engaged their new drive systems. The stars stretched into lines of light, and then they were gone, hurtling across space at speeds that should have been impossible. A journey that would have taken 3 weeks by conventional methods took Less than 6 hours, they emerged from faster-than-light travel on the edge of the New Providence system. Rachel's sensors immediately detected the Zerathi fleet in orbit around the planet. Below them, cities burned. Columns of smoke rose from what had once been thriving communities. The death toll was already in the tens of thousands and climbing. Rachel felt cold fury settle in her chest. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of seeing her people slaughtered. She ordered her ships into attack formation and opened a channel to the Zerathi. Commander High Overseer Vikthil responded with amusement. He saw 4 small human vessels challenging his fleet of 12 battleships. It was laughable. He ordered his ships to destroy these foolish intruders and then continue the purification of the planet below. Rachel closed the channel without responding. Words were useless now. Only action mattered. The battle began with a single shot from the Adamant's main cannon. The beam of energy crossed the distance between the fleets in an instant, striking the lead Zerathi battleship directly in its center mass. The vessel's shields, designed to withstand the most powerful weapons in the consortium's arsenal, collapsed immediately. The ship exploded in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the local sun. The remaining Zerathi ships responded with a barrage of weapons fire. Missiles and energy beams streaked toward the human vessels. Rachel watched calmly as the attack splashed harmlessly against her shields. The precursor technology absorbed the energy without strain, converting it into additional power for her own weapons. The Resolute and Defiant moved to flank the enemy formation, while the Swift darted between the larger ships, targeting their weapon systems with precision strikes. The Zerathi commanders tried to coordinate a response, but human ships were too fast, too maneuverable, too powerful. Every tactic they attempted was countered before it could develop. Rachel directed the battle with cold efficiency. She had studied Zerathi tactics for years, running thousands of simulations against their standard formations. She knew exactly how they would react to every move she made. The enemy was fighting by a playbook that her people had memorized long ago. One by one, the Zerathi battleships fell. Some exploded under the concentrated fire of human weapons. Others were crippled, their engines destroyed, left drifting helplessly in space. The battle that Vikthil had expected to be a quick execution of inferior enemies became a desperate fight for survival. 11 minutes after the first shot was fired, it was over. 9 Zerathi ships had been destroyed. The remaining 3 were disabled, their crews sending frantic distress signals to anyone who would listen. Human casualties were 0. Not a single ship had been seriously damaged. Not a single crew member had been injured. Rachel ordered her ships to take up defensive positions around New Providence. The survivors on the surface needed protection until reinforcements arrived. She also ordered the disabled Zerathi vessels secured. Their crews would face justice for what they had done. On the planet below, the survivors emerged from shelters and hiding places. They looked up at the sky and saw human ships where Zerathi destroyers had been. Many of them wept with relief. Many others wept for those who had not survived. The news spread across human space within hours. The consortium's communication networks carried the reports to every corner of the galaxy. A human fleet had engaged Zerathi forces and won decisively. Technology that no one had ever seen had turned the tide of battle. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted in a single afternoon. On Earth, President Marcus Webb addressed the United Earth Council. His words were broadcast to every human colony, every ship, every outpost. He spoke of the attack on New Providence, of the innocent lives lost, of the Zerathi aggression that had forced humanity's hand. He spoke of the secret preparations that had been underway for generations, of the technology that had allowed them to defend themselves at last, and then he spoke of what came next. Humanity would no longer hide. Humanity would no longer pretend to be weak. The galaxy would see what humans were truly capable of, and anyone who threatened them would face the consequences. The speech ended, and across human space, people celebrated and mourned in equal measure. They celebrated because they finally had hope. They mourned because that hope had come at such a terrible cost. The people of New Providence paid the price for humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage. Admiral, Grant arrived with the main fleet 12 hours after the battle ended. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the wreckage drifting in orbit. Rachel Torres had done exactly what she was trained to do. She had proven that humanity's secret weapons worked even better than expected, but Grant knew that this was only the beginning. The Zerathi would not accept this defeat quietly. The consortium would demand answers. Other species would have to choose sides. The galaxy was about to enter a period of upheaval unlike anything it had seen in millennia. He gave orders for the fleet to establish defensive perimeter around New Providence. Relief supplies were already on their way. Medical teams would help the wounded. Engineers would begin rebuilding what had been destroyed. Humanity would take care of its own, and then they would deal with those responsible. Rachel Torres stood at the viewport of her ship, watching the planet turn slowly below. She had won an impossible victory, but she felt no triumph. Too many people had died before she could arrive. Too many families had been torn apart. The Zerathi had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about their place in the galaxy instead. Humanity had taught them one. The great chamber of the Galactic Consortium had never been so tense. Representatives from all 12 elder races sat in their designated positions, arranged in a semicircle around the speaking platform. For thousands of years, this room had been the center of galactic governance. Decisions made here affected trillions of beings across countless worlds. Today, a human stood at the center of it all. Ambassador Patricia Lane was small by galactic standards. Most of the beings in this room towered over her by meters. The Zerathi were reptilian giants with scales like armor. The Velthari were insectoid creatures with multiple limbs and compound eyes. The Korthani resembled massive bears covered in thick blue fur. All of them looked down at this tiny human with expressions ranging from contempt to curiosity. Patricia was not intimidated. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. She had studied every species, learned their languages, understood their cultures. She knew exactly how to address each of them, exactly which words would carry the most weight. She began by describing what had happened at New Providence. She showed images of the burning cities, the dead civilians, the children who had been caught in the bombardment. She let the evidence speak for itself, forcing the representatives to see what the Zerathi had done. High Overseer Vikthel interrupted, claiming that the attack was a justified response to human violations of consortium regulations. Humans had been expanding beyond their approved boundaries. They had been trading with unauthorized species. They had been showing disrespect for the established order. Patricia let him finish, then responded calmly. She asked if the penalty for regulatory violations was now the extermination of civilian populations. She asked if the consortium approved of the murder of children as a tool of governance. She asked if this was the justice that the elder races offered to younger species. The chamber fell silent. No one could answer her questions without condemning either the Zerathi or the entire system they had built. Patricia continued. She spoke of 800 years of human history within the consortium. She described the unfair treaties that had been imposed when humanity first made contact, the restrictions that had prevented their growth, the resources that had been taken, the opportunities that had been denied. She spoke of human colonies that had been raided by pirates while consortium forces looked the other way. She spoke of human citizens who had been denied basic rights on alien worlds. Through it all, she said, humanity had remained patient. They had followed the rules. They had accepted their inferior status because they believed that the system would eventually treat them fairly. They had hoped that the elder races would see them as equals. Someday New Providence had ended that hope. She announced that humanity was formally withdrawing from the Galactic Consortium. They would no longer accept treaties that treated them as lesser beings. They would no longer submit to inspections designed to keep them weak. They would chart their own course among the stars. Furthermore, she said, any species that wished to join them was welcome. Humanity would build something new, a community based on equality rather than domination. They had no desire for empire or conquest. They simply wanted to be free. The response was immediate chaos. Representatives shouted at each other across the chamber. The Zerathi demanded that humanity be punished for their defiance. The Velthari called for calm and negotiation. The Korthoni sat in silence, watching everything with careful eyes. High Overseer Vikthal rose to his full height, nearly 4 meters of scaled muscle and barely contained rage. He declared that the Zeruthi Dominion would not tolerate this insult. Humanity had defied the natural order of the galaxy. They would be crushed like the insects they were. 3 other species joined the Zeruthi in their declaration of war: the Morvathi, the Sithani, and the Krolith. Together, they commanded over 2,000 warships and controlled a third of the galaxy. They had destroyed rebellious species before. They would do so again. The remaining 8 elder races chose neutrality. They would not fight alongside the Zeruthi, but they would not help the humans either. They would wait and see which side emerged victorious. Patricia Lane left the chamber with her head held high. She had delivered humanity's message. Now the soldiers would deliver the rest. Admiral Christopher Grant received word of the declaration within minutes. He had been expecting it. His staff had prepared contingency plans for exactly this scenario. The enemy would attack with overwhelming numbers, confident in their superiority. They would learn the error of their ways. He divided his forces into 3 battle groups. The first, commanded by Natalie Brooks, would strike at Zeruthi forward bases along the border. The second, led by Commander Derek Palmer, would target enemy supply lines and logistics networks. The third, under Captain Michelle Adams, would defend human space against any attacks. The campaign that followed became known as the Humbling. It was the most one-sided conflict in galactic history, Natalie. Brooks led her fleet against the Zeruthi forward base at Kethron Prime. The enemy had assembled 50 warships to defend the installation. Confident that no force could break through their lines, Natalie's 12 ships tore through them like a knife through paper. The battle lasted 23 minutes. 46 enemy vessels were destroyed. The remaining 4 fled into deep space. Derek Palmer struck at enemy supply convoys with surgical precision. His ships appeared from nowhere, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The Zeruthi and their allies found their supply lines collapsing. Fleets were stranded without fuel. Armies were left without ammunition. The infrastructure of war crumbled under relentless human attacks. Michelle Adams defended human space with ferocity that became legendary. When a combined fleet of 200 enemy ships attempted to strike at Earth itself, she met them with 40 vessels. The enemy fleet was annihilated. Michelle lost 3 ships, all of which were later recovered and repaired. The technological gap was simply too great. Human shields could withstand anything the enemy threw at them. Human weapons could destroy any target they chose. Human ships could outrun, outmaneuver, and outfight anything the consortium could field. The precursor technology had given humanity an advantage that no amount of numbers could overcome. Within 3 months, the Zeruthi Dominion was begging for ceasefire talks. Their fleet had been reduced to less than a quarter of its original strength. Their colonies were defenseless. Their economy was in ruins. The species that had ruled their sector for 6,000 years faced the very real possibility of extinction. President Marcus Webb agreed to negotiations, much to the surprise of some of his advisors. They wanted to push forward, to punish the Zeruthi for new providence, to make them suffer as humans had suffered. But Marcus understood that cruelty would only breed future conflicts. Humanity needed to show the galaxy that they were better than the species who had oppressed them. The peace terms were surprisingly generous. The Zeruthi would pay reparations for new providence and acknowledge human sovereignty. They would release all human prisoners and return all seized property. They would accept human equality in all future dealings. In return, their worlds would not be occupied. Their people would not be harmed. The other 3 enemy species accepted similar terms. The war ended 6 months after it began. With humanity emerging as the dominant military power in the galaxy, the neutral species watched these events with growing concern. They had expected the Zeruthi coalition to crush the humans, restoring the old order. Instead, they had witnessed the complete collapse of 4 major powers. The galaxy they had known for millennia was gone, replaced by something new and uncertain. Admiral Grant stood on the bridge of his flagship as the final peace treaties were signed. He thought about all the years of preparation, all the sacrifices that had been made, all the people who had dedicated their lives to this moment. Daniel Price had started this journey over a century ago with a single discovery. Now humanity stood at the center of galactic affairs, respected and feared in equal measure. But Grant knew that winning the war was only the first step. Building a lasting peace would be far more difficult. The galaxy was watching to see what humanity would do with their new power. The decisions they made now would shape the future for generations to come. He hoped they would make the right choices. 20 years had passed since the war ended. The galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old consortium, with its rigid hierarchies and ancient privileges, had dissolved. In its place stood the Galactic Assembly, a new governing body where every species, regardless of age or power, held an equal voice. Unity Station orbited a neutral star at the center of civilized space. It was massive, a construction project that had taken a decade to complete. Built with the cooperation of over 100 species, millions of beings lived and worked within its rotating rings, representing every corner of the galaxy. Trade flourished in its markets. Diplomats negotiated in its councils. Scientists shared discoveries in its research facilities. Admiral Christopher Grant, now elderly and retired from active service, stood on an observation deck overlooking the main concourse. His hair had gone completely white, and his once powerful frame had grown thin with age. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching, still assessing everything around him. Beside him stood his granddaughter, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Grant. She wore the uniform of the Human Defense Force. Serving aboard one of the patrol ships that maintained peace throughout the Assembly's territory, she was young and idealistic. Born into a galaxy where humanity was respected rather than despised. Christopher pointed out the various species moving through the concourse below. Zurithi merchants traded goods with human suppliers. Velthari engineers consulted with Corthoni architects. Species that had been enemies a generation ago now worked side by side, building something better than any of them could have created alone. Sarah asked her grandfather to tell her about the old days. She had studied the history in school, but she wanted to hear it from someone who had lived through it. She wanted to understand what humanity had sacrificed to reach this point. Christopher thought for a long moment before answering. He told her about the fear that had defined his early career. The constant awareness that humanity could be destroyed at any moment if the elder races decided they were a threat. He told her about the secret preparations, the hidden shipyards, the training programs that had consumed his entire adult life. He told her about Daniel Price, the explorer who had found the precursor vault and changed everything. He told her about Amanda Cole, who had overseen the development of technologies that defied understanding. He told her about the thousands of scientists and engineers and soldiers who had dedicated their lives to a vision they might never see fulfilled. Most of all, he told her about the moment when everything changed. The attack on New Providence had forced humanity to reveal themselves before they were fully ready. They had won the war that followed, but the cost had been tremendous. Over 200,000 people had died on New Providence before help arrived. Their names were inscribed on a memorial that filled an entire wall in the Assembly's Hall of Remembrance. Sarah listened quietly, absorbing every word. She had grown up in a galaxy where humanity was powerful and respected. She had never known the fear and humiliation that her grandfather's generation had endured. It was hard for her to imagine a time when humans had been treated as lesser beings. Christopher understood her difficulty. That was why he told these stories. Why all the veterans of the old days shared their experiences with the younger generations. It was important to remember where they had come from, to appreciate what they had built, to understand the responsibility that came with their current position. Humanity had not sought to dominate the galaxy. They had sought only to end the domination of others. When they emerged victorious from the war, they could have imposed their will on everyone. They could have become the new elder race, treating other species the way they themselves had been treated. Instead, they had chosen a different path. They had shared the precursor technology with anyone willing to join the new assembly. They had invested in the development of younger species, helping them grow and prosper. They had built a system based on cooperation rather than hierarchy, on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Not everyone had appreciated this generosity. Some species resented humanity's power, even when it was used benevolently. Some remembered the old order fondly and wished to restore it. There were plots and conspiracies, attempts to undermine the assembly and bring back the days of elder race supremacy, but these efforts always failed. The assembly had grown too strong, its benefits too obvious, its members too committed to the new way of doing things. Species that had lived in fear for millennia now flourished. Worlds that had been neglected now prospered. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was better than it had ever been. Christopher and Sarah walked through the station, passing through districts built in the styles of a dozen different species. They stopped at a memorial dedicated to the humans who had fought in the war. Reading the names of those who had given their lives for a future they would never see, Sarah asked her grandfather if it had been worth it. All the secrecy, all the sacrifice, all the lives lost. Did he ever regret the path humanity had chosen? Christopher considered the question carefully. He thought about the young man he had been, full of anger and determination, and willing to do anything to free his species from oppression. He thought about the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the decisions that still haunted his dreams. Then he looked around at the station, at the diverse crowds moving through its corridors, at the ships visible through the viewports, carrying beings from every corner of the galaxy to destinations they could never have reached under the old order. He thought about his granddaughter, born free and unafraid, confident in her place among the stars. No, he told her. He did not regret anything. The price had been high, but the result was worth every sacrifice. Humanity had not built an empire of conquest. They had built something far more valuable. They had built an empire of hope. The stars stretched out before them, visible through the great windows of the observation deck. Once those stars had represented danger and limitation, places where humans were not welcome, futures they were not allowed to dream. Now they represented possibility and promise, a galaxy open to anyone with the courage to explore it. Sarah thought about her own future, about the career ahead of her, and the challenges she would face. She thought about her children and grandchildren, who would inherit a galaxy shaped by the decisions her grandfather's generation had made. She hoped she would be worthy of their legacy. Christopher put his hand on her shoulder, as if reading her thoughts. He told her that the work was never finished. Each generation had to earn its place, had to prove itself worthy of what came before. The empire humanity had constructed was not made of ships or weapons or territory. It was made of values and principles and the determination to never again bow before anyone. That was what they had to protect. That was what they had to pass on. They stood together in silence, grandfather and granddaughter, watching the endless dance of ships and stars. Behind them, the galaxy continued its business, millions of beings living lives that would have been impossible a century ago. The old order was gone, replaced by something new and fragile and precious. Humanity had risen from nothing to stand among the greatest powers the galaxy had ever known. They had done it not through cruelty or conquest, but through patience and preparation and an unshakable belief in their own potential. They had constructed a mighty empire, and in doing so, they had shown the universe what they were truly capable of. The stars belonged to everyone now, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way.